back to the Penguin Official Podcast. I'm your host, film critic Amy Nicholson. After each show episode, meet me here to ask the creators, writers, directors, cast, and crew a lot of questions. There will be spoilers, because that is what makes for a good conversation. It's episode 5, and we are all wondering how many characters are going to survive till the end of this season. Both Sophia and Oz seem like they're trying to kill their way to the top. The Falcone family has been all but destroyed, leaving the Maroni family, their longtime rivals, in a strong position to take over, until Oz kidnaps the Maroni son Taj for ransom, douses him in gasoline, and then lights him and his mother Nadia on fire the moment they're reunited. Burning Taj and Nadia alive is Oz at his most barbaric, but flames cannot easily be contained. While he was able to remove Taj and Nadia from the equation, Oz also accidentally destroys his newly acquired bliss, just as he learns that the Maroni patriarch Sal has broken out of prison and is hell-bent on revenge. By the end of the episode, Oz and his mother have been forced into hiding in an old apartment very much like the one Oz grew up in. Let's jump into my first conversation with writer and co-producer Breannah Gibson. Hello, Breannah. Thank you for taking an abandoned trolley line to get over here to talk about episode 5.
Thank you for having me. I wouldn't have it any other way, obviously.
Well, let's start from the beginning, and by which I mean your beginning. Like, what was it about the Penguin as a story, a character that made you want to join this project?
Well, I grew up watching Batman movies. I don't come to comic books, honestly. I have to be honest with you. Like, I don't read a lot of comics, but I love all Batman movies, and I mostly think that is because Batman is a vehicle for great villains. Like, I think the Batman universe just provides you with just like a plethora of insanely cool, very twisted, dark villains. And Penguin is one that I feel like wasn't, Danny DeVito is sort of the one you think of when you think of the Penguin. And I just felt like it was such a good opportunity to explore a character in a new way. And then when you see Colin's performance in the Batman, you're like, all I want to do is see where this guy, goes after this. I want to see him go home, and I want to live with a guy who like finds humor in this super dark noir world. And that sort of was what drew me to it. I also think the choice to make the Penguin come from a very different background than he normally does in comic book lore, it was, I think, something else that drew me to him, because normally you see Penguin as a guy who comes from a rich family who is disgraced by his appearance, and this is just like the opposite story here. We're like talking about a guy who had to like claw his way up, which is why he has so many scars, and he's willing to do anything to get to the place that he normally starts at. So I think it just makes him sort of fascinating, and I was just like super excited to dig into a character like that.
Oh, so then where do you start at?
Yeah, I think there was about a month that I sort of just like lived inside of mob movies and true crime documentaries and podcasts. I'm sure Lauren has talked about this, but one of her big inspirations is Buddy Cianci, which is, he was a mayor of Providence, Rhode Island. There's a great podcast called, I think it's called Crime Town, season 1. And Buddy Cianci is this mayor of Providence, Rhode Island, who sort of embodies a lot of characteristics that Oz has. He wants to do good for his people, but everything he does, he goes about it in sort of a, not above board way. And the way that Oz interfaces with people in the first few episodes of this series specifically, a lot of that comes from the inspiration of Buddy Cianci and how he spoke with other politicians and also used his connects in like the crime world to make sure that his people were happy and felt like they were getting everything they wanted from this mayor. So I feel like in a lot of ways Lauren was sort of modeling Oz and the way that he interacts with people after Buddy Cianci. So that was definitely where we started. We all listened to that podcast, and then beyond that it was a lot of I was like living in watching like Miller's Crossing and The Long Good Friday and Clute, which is like something I'd never seen before I started on the show. And there are just so many movies that I feel like we were pulling from because Lauren's big thing was wanting to sort of subvert the genre. And to do that, you sort of have to really make sure you know everything that you're playing with. But
Right, you can't subvert until you completely understand, no grapple.
I think so. Yeah.
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 Otherwise, you're just subverting nonsense. You're like, I don't know.
Yeah.
That's kind of my idea about it. Oh, let's really get into episode 5. I want to start with a line from this scene where Oz is panicked about his mom's safety. And to my ears, at least, he sounds completely honest, which is rare for him.
All right, come on. Yo, come in.
Come on.
I'm gonna need you with my mom.
Oz, I thought I'd be with you and the guys. I'm ready.
Yeah,
I swear.
I know you want to get in the fight, kid, but I ain't got no one else I can trust. Look, Sophia's gonna come for us, whether it's today or tomorrow. She's gonna do whatever the fuck it takes, and I can't have. My ma, she's, she's what keeps me good.
My Masha keeps me good. Is this genuinely how Oz sees himself? He's not bad. He's a good guy doing what he has to do. His mom is his moral compass.
I think, well, yes, because I think Oz lives and dies by his mother's approval. Like, everything that Oz does is sort of from the point of view of, like, would my mother approve of this choice or not? I mean, you see in this episode that he, when you go see Frances at her home, she knows a lot more than I think the audience will realize. Like, she knows that he's going after the Falcones, and she knows that the Maronis are second. And the only thing she doesn't know is that they have been the Falcones have been gassed, and now the Maronis are in play. And I think, when you learn that, you sort of realize that, oh, this is like his confidant. It's not only his mother, but it's like sort of his co-conspirator. She is helping him plan all of this takedown of all of these crime families. And so I do think that he believes what he's saying to Victor when he's saying, like, my ma keeps me good. But I also think for Oz, by the way, just like good is a relative term. Like, what does good mean for Oz? How good is he? I think he believes what he's saying when he says, like,
What
my
does
ma.
good mean for Oz?
The thing about Oz is he always believes that he's telling the truth when he's saying it. I think he really believes in what he's saying. And yeah, I think my ma keeps me good is Oz's way of sort of explaining to Victor, like, I need her approval. Everything that I'm doing right now is, at the end of the day, so that Frances will love me and so that she will believe in me. And but I don't necessarily think I think he believes he's a good person, but I think he has to go, in the terms of Buddy Cianci, he has to find good by way of not so great means. Like, everything that he's doing is for the greater good, but I think he knows deep down that it's not necessarily a super clean path to, helping his mother and helping the people of Gotham.
Oh, some of the word choices in this episode really popped out at me. The ma, later on he says top of the world. Those are lines that, to my ears at least, they sound like Jimmy Cagney in White Heat. I know that I know that Oz loves old black and white movies. It's not impossible to see White Heat, which, if people who are listening haven't seen it, Jimmy Cagney plays this, like, psychotic gangster who is way too attached to his own mom. You should definitely check out White Heat, by the way. But it has me wondering, we're talking about how the world of Oz is influenced by, real life gangsters, real life corrupt people. Do you think actually the reverse is also true, that real life gangsters are influenced by movies?
I mean, hard for me to say if, what real life gangsters are really taking, but I do think, I mean, I know, in shows like Sopranos, they're always talking about The Godfather, and I think we have all these portrayals of these badass men, sort of taking power from the inside, and that, of course, I'm sure if I was them, I'd be watching and looking at that as an emulation of, like, what else, how to live my life if I was in this horrible crime world.
Yeah, you got to learn it all, not just to subvert it, but to master it.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think I do think, like, art imitates life, imitates art. So I definitely think there's probably layers to that. The cool thing about a show like this is, I think we were so enmeshed in the story and this super crime heavy world that I think things came about without people even realizing it. Like, even in preparing for this, I was rewatching episode 5, and there's this great moment when Sophia kisses Johnny Viti on the head, and it's obviously right before that great scene where she kills him to prove a point to all of her new men that the Falcone crime family is dead and there's a new family in town, and she's doing like the kiss of death, and that is like a known mafia thing that people do when they, I don't know if you've seen Godfather 2, but Michael kisses Fredo, and that's when Fredo knows that he's done for, because he's been found out as double crossing, and she's kissing Viti on the head, and I think like close viewers are going to realize, oh my God, Viti's about to die. She just gave him the kiss of death, and the truth is, the kiss of death in the mafia world, we don't really even know where that comes from. It's like rumored to be like Vito Genovese kissing a guy in prison who didn't actually end up dying, and then movies ripped that from the news stories about Vito Genovese kissing somebody in prison, and then it became a thing in movies that then I think gangsters used in real life. So, like, your question is so fair, but it's hard to answer because I think like it really is like a life imitating art, imitating life, and that's the best example I can really give you. And then here we are in our show, where Sophia's kissing Viti on the head right before she kills him, and that wasn't in the script. That was just somebody on our set, either Kristen or our director Helen Shaver, and making a conscious choice to sort of like pay homage to something that either came from movies or came from real life.
I mean, it feels like now we're just really talking about loops, which is fitting, because this episode feels like a loop to me. I mean, like, Oz has spent this whole series, his whole life, like trying to get him and his mom a better life. And in this episode, they circle right around back to the beginning. Crown Point, 2-bedroom apartment, and things are actually even worse because there's not even electricity. And there's a lot of people who would like to kill them. And I want to even just play this scene right here where Oz is in bed with his mother, because that just seems to be his lowest point that we've seen so far.
I'm sorry, Ma. I feel like I let you down.
You did.
This place is temporary. Oh my God. I just gotta figure out my next move.
Yep. My boy. With such big dreams. Like your father.
No, Ma. I ain't like him. I can fix this. It's you and me under one roof now. Like it used to be.
Are you trying to kill me?
Oh, I'm trying to protect you. It's better this way. When we're together.
Taking me back here. You're throwing it in my face. What I lost.
I lost him though.
Tell us more about this scene, and what do you think it means for like Oz and his relationship to his mother?
Yeah, I think you're sort of right on the money. This is Oz's low point in the series. He is, what this scene is highlighting is his deepest want is to be loved and revered. His deepest fear is that love is transactional. And what he's learning in this scene is, once again, to him, love is transactional. He didn't do what his mother wanted. He didn't get her the penthouse, and now he's being punished for it. And that punishment fuels him, and that's what sends him to the trolley station and to spin this horrible situation into a win yet again for Oz. And I think that's the beauty of their dark relationship.
Well, what about Oz's relationship with Victor? Because it also feels like it's evolving to see Oz rely on him on short notice. One touchstone that, of course, like jumps to mind is Walter White and Jesse Pinkman. I don't know if you feel like they relate to this or how you feel like they're a different tag team.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great comparison, especially as you get into the later seasons of Breaking Bad, where Walt just becomes this sort of unrecognizable character from the pilot, and Jesse is sort of his moral compass. I think, in a way, Oz and Victor have a similar relationship because Oz keeps him around because he wants to mentor him. And in that way, you can see that there's something good in Oz. Like, I know that he says that his ma is good, and I think he believes that when he's saying it to Victor, but Oz would never admit that in the the real situation that they're in, Victor is his moral compass here. Victor is the good in the situation, and Victor is that naive kid from the same neighborhood that Oz grew up in that maybe Oz wants to see succeed, and if he helps Victor succeed, he succeeds. And I think there's part of that Oz is really enjoying about their relationship, and especially this episode. After episode 3, Victor's all in. He came back for Oz. He saved him. He's now like it's the two of us, and there's nobody else. And this is the first episode where you get to see that in practice, and you get to see Victor making decisions. He's the one that takes them to Crown Point. That's his choice, and he's doing that because Oz is in turmoil and needs help. And I think it's really special in this episode that Oz sort of acknowledges it in his own Oz way. By the end of the episode, he's happy that Victor has stepped up, and he was able to delegate to Victor. And I think this episode is is a huge growing moment for the two of them in their relationship.
But do you think that Victor can ever see Oz as his Rex Calabrese?
I think that is what Oz wants. I think if Oz had it his way, by the end of this series, Victor would want to plan Oz's funeral and have a parade through the streets and be the
biggest parade ever.
The biggest parade ever. I think if Oz had it his way, I think Victor would carry on Oz's legacy. But like I said, I think, Oz really believes what he's doing and saying in the moment. That doesn't mean that necessarily that will carry throughout the rest of the series.
No, but that is a fascinating distinction, because you're right. I've caught myself thinking of him as like, oh, he's lying here. Oh, he's lying here. But you think to his core, he just believes what he really believes. He just doesn't maybe believe it 5 minutes later.
Yeah, I think the best liars really believe that what they're saying is the truth. And Oz is a great liar because he's a product of his mother and father. His father was just a big dreamer with no action behind his words, and his mother is a woman who, for all intents and purposes, picked herself up by her bootstraps and took care of her kids and did what she had to do. But he's a product of those two people, and I think he embodies both of them, and that's why he believes what he says, because he's, his dad was a dreamer and he's a dreamer too, but he has some action behind his words, just might not be the most above board action you've ever seen.
A moment that I really loved in their relationship is in episode 1 when Victor's talking about where he comes from. And Oz knows this specific slushy spot in his neighborhood. And it hit me as like this clue of like, oh, Oz really knows this town. And that kind of pays off here in episode 5 when he knows the Forgotten Trolley System. And I have to say, despite everything that Oz has done in this show to date, his roots in Gotham, his knowledge of Gotham, that keeps making me want to root for him. Should I be?
I mean, I think yes. What I love about Oz is he believes it when he says he is an underdog, and this is sort of an underdog story, and he is crawling his way to the top by any means necessary. And the more you learn about him, the more you see there is some truth in what he's saying. He is from this neighborhood. He did have a rough childhood, and he is trying to make, the American dream a reality for himself. And I think that's why you root for him, because we've all seen, that the American dream sometimes can be a bit of a lie, and it's harder for people to achieve what they want in life with everything that our world, throws at us. And Oz is the person that says, I'm going to make it happen no matter what. And that no matter what obviously encompasses our whole show. So if you mean I want to root for him, I want the good to shine in Oz at every point. I'm always looking for him to make the choice to, in the first few episodes, side with Sophia, and now I'm looking for him to find something in his old neighborhood that he can use to prop himself up, and I'm looking for him to mentor Victor and be his Rex Calabrese. I'm always rooting for Oz to do the right thing, and I can't tell you that he's always going to, but I think that's what makes him so fun to watch.
Well, Breannah, thank you for this. You've given me a lot to chew on. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Next, we'll be speaking with series creator, executive producer, and showrunner Lauren LeFranc. We've also got two of our actors in here, Theo Rossi, who plays Dr. Julian Rush, and Shohreh Aghdashloo, our Nadia Maroni. Hello, you guys. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much for having us. I appreciate it.
Lauren, this is a really interesting pairing about two interesting characters. I want to start by just having you tell us about Dr. Rush and Nadia and what you looked for in casting these two roles, because both of them have to contain these real double dual sides. You know, Dr. Rush is an Arkham doctor who decides to rebel against the institution and side with his patient. Nadia leads a crime family but has a really soft spot for her husband and her son.
Yeah. What started my interest in Dr. Julian Rush was just looking at the different Arkham State Hospital doctors through time. You know, there's a lot of famous ones that come out of there, but they're all psychopaths, basically, or have violent streaks. And our show is more grounded than that. And I was interested in a character who is intrigued and interested in helping people, but also what type of doctor would sign up to work at Arkham State Hospital. And there's a level of control, I think. God complex is probably the wrong word, but like a level of control that's sort of intriguing there. And, as Theo and I discussed a little bit in terms of his backstory, just, potentially if you have a life that's a little bit more passive, that there's a level of control that you're seeking in that type of situation. And that there's something that is invigorated in him by seeing someone like Sophia become who she becomes. And so in looking for a character like that, it's challenging to find an actor who brings like a level of kindness and yet strength to that type of role. So it never feels overboard. It doesn't feel like a heightened version, because that's the thing that we always would say to all of our actors as we're toning them, really. This show is a crime drama. It's not a traditional comic book show. And so I don't know, Theo's name came in, and I had seen Emily the Criminal and a lot of other Theo's work, and just was like, he has that thing that I can imagine for Dr. Rush. So that was really, really exciting. And he was the only person we talked to for the role. And same with Shohreh, in a different way. I've worked with Shohreh before on my last show, Impulse. We were in Barcelona together shooting. We had a very privileged 24 hours in Barcelona. And it was a lot of fun. And I've always been a fan of Shohreh's for so long. And she always has this incredible weight and heart and spirit that I think you can feel in all of her work. And when we were thinking about Nadia, I never wanted Nadia to be Italian. I never wanted Sal Maroni's family to just be purely Italian. Like, I come from a mixed family. I think it's sort of just more interesting to have a mixed family and to see people that, in my opinion, represent more of the world to us. And so it's like, well, who could run the streets for the Maronis? Like, who is has a strong enough presence, but also cares deeply about family, and that has a loyalty towards family. And Shohreh, to me, I'm like, oh God, if we could get Shohreh, I mean, because especially having worked with her before, that she's the only person that we ever talked about for that role. And, feel very lucky that we have Shohreh and Theo for these respective parts.
Well, Theo, I want to start with you and Dr. Julian Rush, because he, to me, seems like perhaps the most mysterious, maybe even tricky character to portray, because we never really know that much about him through what he says. His job in most of your scenes is literally listening.
Well, I think that, with Dr. Rush, it was, to this day, and maybe one day I'll get over it, it was one of the more complicated processes for me, because I was having such a hard time understanding his compulsion to help her in a way, right? And what I realized is that he, like many of us in life, was in the wrong place at the wrong time. I think that he went in with the best intentions to go into Arkham, and then he realized what Arkham was and how horrific it was. And then I think to deal with that, because someone who gives their entire life to, a specific profession is kind of sheltered in a way from maybe real feelings if you're dealing with other people's feelings. And I don't think he ever really explored his in a way. So then here we go. He gets this opportunity and he sees what she has become, this butterfly. She, like, whatever, however you want to say that butterfly is, it might be the wrong butterfly, but she had become something else. And he was so dying to become something else other than himself. And he had spent all these years after Arkham numbing himself and doing whatever. And I got to tell you, a lot of this came to me months after shooting. I did not know what was going on during that. But no, listen, it's such an incredible world. Lauren is one of the most collaborative people I've ever worked with in my life. I harassed her for months and I couldn't stop. I just wanted answers and answers and answers for who this guy was and why he was doing what he was doing. But just to watch her, Kristen is a powerhouse. And to watch what she was doing, the unraveling, to be there 10 years before in Arkham, to be there after it, to see the unraveling and to see what she becomes and to be part of that process was absolutely beautiful for the character and for myself.
What do you think, Theo, that Dr. Rush's diagnosis of Sophia is? Does he really think that she's troubled or in need of help, or is his boss? Are they just carrying out Carmine's orders to keep her out of his way?
I think when she first comes in, he's trying to figure that out. He knows what everyone else knows. He knows what he's told, right? That she had done all these things, that she had become this person. And I think it's when, there's a moment where they kind of grab hands, where they have this moment of like, maybe she is innocent. Is that even possible? And if she is, that is such a horrific path to go down because of everything she had been through up until that moment. But I think he realizes very quickly that if he questions that, his professional life is also in jeopardy. And then there's a whole nother can of worms that could go. Who else is innocent? What is going on with this system? How corrupt is it? And again, I go back to someone who lives a sheltered life might not understand corruption at its, highest forms in a lot of our different sacred, industries in a way, healthcare, whatever, different things. And I think that he notices more and more that this person is not who they're saying they are. And then everything unfolds from there in their relationship.
Well, Lauren, insanity is such a theme in the entire Batman franchise. Most of the villains that we meet in this series are some degree of insane. The Joker, the Riddler, the Scarecrow, Batman himself is a bit mentally unhealthy. Sometimes watching this show, I had the thought, are Sophia and Oz two of the most mentally balanced antagonists in Gotham?
If you're comparing them to the Joker and the Riddler, maybe. For me, when it comes to Sophia, I was very interested in having, especially a female character, have people say she's crazy and mentally unwell, and to target that as a conversation piece, because I think that's just sort of speaking to the whole hysterical woman trope or reality that really hit a lot of women of a certain time. And Oz, I don't see him as a mentally healthy guy. But I think what is different about him versus, other villains in the comic books is that he's a man. He's not outwardly, he's not a serial killer like the Riddler in Matt's film. He's actually pretty charming and funny and engaging. And that's what makes him, I think, scarier. There's rage right underneath the surface, always with him. And he's a narcissist. So again, as long as you do right by him, then this is great and things are great for you. But if you wrong him in a way that he sees that as wrong, then that's where shit hits the fan and then things go awry. So he's more complicated than I think in some ways other, quote unquote villains. And we try on our show to make people feel less black and white and live more in the gray area, because I think there's just more people like Oz. And I think there's more people like Sophia in the world, so it's harder to define them as mentally well or unhealthy or villainous or good, because we're just living as complicated people do in our show.
Well, we have some really powerful scenes in this episode of what Oz will do when he is wronged. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, we have two types of institutions. We have Arkham and we have the prison that also... Shohreh, your character, Nadia, she's not locked up. She's spending a lot of time in it, though, visiting. I want to play this clip of Nadia and Sal and Oz in prison.
What do you want?
I want what's mine. What your wife stole from me. I want my fucking shrooms.
Our son is not a pawn. There is a code.
Oh, is that right? So what, I take the wrong Maroni, that it?
You do not threaten my family.
Jesus, Sal. Put your dick away. Don't forget who I got at home.
Shohreh, people in this episode keep insisting that family is weakness. But does Nadia believe that?
No, she cannot believe in that. She's coming from a huge family. She's left a revolution behind. She has traveled the 7 seas. She has learned a lot. And therefore, she herself has been revolutionized. She's where she cannot tell the difference between right and wrong. All she is trying to do is to save her family, her husband, her son, and what's important to them. Therefore, there is no right and wrong there, which reminds me of a poem by the Persian poet Rumi, which says, beyond the notion of right and wrong, there is a field. Would you like to meet me there? That's where she's standing. There is no right and wrong according to the books to her. All she's trying to do is, her country was invaded, foreign occupation. Now she needs to make another country, her country, and then save herself and her family. And she's willing to do everything to the point that she would even sacrifice herself for this family. And this is how she was raised in an old country.
Do you think that this love, that it makes the Maronis maybe a better team than the Falcones, at least morally?
Well, again, what's moral, what's not here, it's really ambiguous. We cannot tell exactly. But according to the standards, again, to the books out there, yes, we can say that morally they're more kind of aware of the facts, what is wrong and what is right. But they're doing this because they have to do this. It's a matter of survival. Back to the law of the jungle.
I know, it's heartbreaking what happens to Nadia and Sal in this episode because, honestly, as a viewer, they're kind of the only team that I could believe in as an actual unit, a partnership. I mean, do you feel like they were equals before he got locked up, or is it now that he's locked up, she's been shouldering more of the weight?
I have a feeling that she is now feeling kind of more in control. Again, going back to where she's coming from, an old country, makes her to believe that if there's anything to do, it's the man who should go ahead and start doing it, and then she would follow it. But obviously, when her husband is in jail, she immediately takes over. And I think that even surprises Sal. Like, even Sal didn't know that she had so much strength. I guess when you go through a lot and do not have a time to think about your doings, your past, your present, what's going to happen in the future, you're just involved with something like a snowball that's coming down a hill. You really don't think properly. All you do is action, action, and what's right to do right now, action, action, action. And therefore, obviously, you make a lot of mistakes because they're all kind of spontaneous, haven't been thought about thoroughly. If she had thought about meeting him in the scene where they exchanged the drugs with his drugs with her son, if she had been thinking thoroughly, she would have not done that.
She would have not set him up with all of it?
No, never. She would have not done that. She would have been more kind of wise. She is at that age that you expect her to be wiser. But then she's caught in a situation that is happening fast. Like every hour is like every second. Therefore, she doesn't have time.
I mean, Lauren, in this scene, this really horrific scene, I'm wondering, is burning Taj and Nadia alive, do you think that's the worst thing Oz has ever done?
No, I don't think so. But I think it is meant to elevate what we understand this man to be and what he's capable of. And I think he is willing to do something like that. That Oz's version of a code is very different than what the Maroni's version is. And in sort of the older sort of mob code book, you don't touch someone's family member. That's off limits. But Oz doesn't play by those rules. He plays by his own rules. And whenever it benefits him, he can justify it. He definitely 100% did not need to do what he does to Nadia and Taj. He does it sadistically. And there is an element that we see of him enjoying that level of power and pain that he put on this family because he believes they wronged him and they've made trouble for him. And it's their fault. Like, this is his darker rationale. And he thrives off of, as Shohreh is talking about, Nadia being tired and the vulnerability you feel, and how he knows how much the Maronis love their family. That is what separates them from the Falcones. They are a tightly knit, loyal family to each other. And so Oz sees an opportunity to take advantage of that. It's why he hid his mother away for so long too. He understands how the Falcones operate. He learned that through what they did to their own daughter with Sophia. And if they could do that to Sophia, then what could they do to a guy like Oz? That's partly why he's hid his mother away and told people that she's dead for so long, is actually to protect Frances. He knows all that. He has someone he deeply loves and cares about. And yet he still can do something as terrible and treacherous as he does to Nadia and Taj without batting an eye.
Yeah, I mean, I'm picturing the look in Oz's eyes as you are burning to death, which is so horrible, like sitting here thinking about you burning to death. And, the look in his eye is just, he's fascinated. He's not quite enjoying it, but he's not quite repelled. And honestly, now that I'm saying that out loud, I am thinking about all of the scenes, Theo, that you have to play in Arkham, watching horrible things happen, being a person in that room, figuring out what's on your face.
I think that Oz, to go back to that, and I just wanted to say, let's not take away Oz's ambition. He's ambitious. He's quite the ambitious person. And, some people, their ambition goes, the wrong way. I think looking at someone being in that position, I can't imagine, and I've thought about this, and Lauren and I had discussed this, someone, even a psychologist or a psychiatrist, and again, like that you're listening to the deepest, darkest, most painful of someone all day, every day for your job for a very long time, and what that would do to your psyche. Now, if you add on top of that, there's a physical torture component going on to it, a danger component going on to it, while also dealing with all these psychological problems, not just from Sophia, but from everyone else in Arkham that you're dealing with. Ultimately, it's going to start to make you question your own sanity or place in this world and where you're at, and then your own wants and needs. I think there was a very significant part when I first, in episode 2, where she slaps him, and originally what we had written in there is that he looks like he enjoyed it. And the difference was, it's like that he enjoyed the feeling of pain because he needed to feel something again. And I think that he's become so incredibly numb to watching this horrific thing that he basically lost himself. And why he now, again, in hindsight, dedicated his life to doing whatever was because he needed to rectify his soul in a way for what he had seen in this horrific thing. Again, not just through Sophia, but through everyone. If you can imagine what Ventress was doing outside of Sophia, that's the stuff I had to start imagining was going on for Magpie and every other person in that asylum that he was overseeing at the moment.
That's fascinating, because I was wondering before we were talking about it if it was, I was thinking about actually that famous episode of The Sopranos, that famous other like mobster and therapist combination, where Tony Soprano's therapist, Dr. Melfi, realizes that therapy, especially talk therapy, just makes sociopaths more sociopathic. Mm-hmm. They're practicing lying. Mm-hmm. I want to come in here and ask you, like, if it's also just contagious.
Yeah, listen, I come from a heavy-duty crime background. You know, my father had gone to jail when I was young, and I was always around organized crime. And that's another factor that plays into your psyche of how you kind of see the world, where everything is slightly duplicitous. Everything is kind of, having to move ahead, kind of, that narcissistic tendencies out of survival. Sometimes it's, nature, nurture, right? Like what you're around and what you're involved with. And I think that, in seeing all that stuff and being a part of it is you have to try to understand all these different levels of humanity and what's happening and why they're there and what this is. And I think for me, when I was looking at it from his point of view, is that this is someone who's lost in every single way due to the profession that they had followed, which in probably the beginning sounded like a really fantastic idea. I think that it's dedication to something, and seeing now adding on physical violence, right? This violence that he's seeing, this true horrific thing, and then also adding on guilt and adding on, is she innocent? Am I complicit? How do I do? And then add on his own stuff of, I want what you have. How did you come from the depths of the worst place a human can be to literally be thrown away, like we were just saying about Rosemary Kennedy? How do you come from there to gain your power and be fully in control and really strut of like this peacock where you go, oh my, how do I get that? That's the superpower. And I think that when I was watching her evolve, I was in awe of her, of who she had become, this strong woman. I'm raised by women. I was raised only around all women, after my father was gone. And I was amazed at watching her overcome, again, in a horrific way. I understand she did bad things. I get all that. But at the end of the day, she's a survivor. And I had to figure out how I was going to be a survivor in that.
I mean, Theo, I didn't know that about your background, and forgive me if this question is too much, but being now in a fictional world with some similarities to how you grew up.
Yeah.
I hate that it's coming out that way. How does it make you feel?
Oh, I think it's fascinating. I mean, it's a fascinating life because in a way, whenever I've seen it from when I was growing up and watching it, I've always been fascinated by it because the truth is, it's quite attractive. People don't understand that. Like, there's an attraction to not following. It's almost like being an outlaw to society. And in one way or another, being an artist is an outlaw to society, just a different path, right? And, and then there's ways to be outside of society. And when you look at organized crime, when you look at any crime, it's just someone who I always say no one ever wants to be a criminal. They just are because of situation. If you offered them something else with more money and another way, most, not all, most, because power has to come into play, most would choose it, but it becomes out of survival. So for me, when I see it and I watch it, it's really interesting because I never looked at it like that when I was young. I mean, as hard as this is to say, it's some of the greatest, funnest, freest people just doing horrific things.
I mean, I'm loving the symmetry that's coming out of this conversation. Hearing Shohreh, how you left Iran during the revolution and then built that into Nadia. I want to end kind of on this note, which is, having just met you, I would love to get to hang out in Spain with you the way that Lauren did. Lauren has said that you perhaps give the best life advice on the planet. So in an episode that is sort of about talking through our problems, trying to figure out how to live a better life, I kind of want to just give you the mic and say, what is your best advice for everybody out there listening?
By all means. First of all, I really have to thank Lauren for this amazing, meaningful, sophisticated TV series. And I have to admit to you something. When the offer came, all I was told was, Lauren, send it to you. And I'm like, I will do it. And then they're like, no, you need to read it. I said, this young, sophisticated lady, she only commits herself to the best, so I want to be on this plane. And then I was told that it was about the penguin, and I'm like, wow, finally we're concentrating on the Penguin, and it's for the first time that we're going to elaborate on his life. And I think there's a reason that we're more interested in the life of the villains nowadays than Madame Curie or, Dostoevsky, one of the best writers I've ever known in my life, is the fact that we want to know what happens to a person that turns him from a human into a creature. And the best advice would be find out for yourself if you're a human or you're a body snatcher. If you're a human or if you're a creature. Do you really care about other people? Do you really think about the world and what is happening to the world, not just you? Are you objective or are you subjective? Be objective for Christ's sake, because when you do that, you would be able to see things with all the dimensions in it. When you're subjective, it's flat. You believe in one thing, and like horses who are wearing blinkers, you just keep following your idea. But if you pay attention to every sign, everything that is going on around you, by you, through you, pay attention to it, because we're lucky if we can grasp the signs timely and use them. Just be yourself and let the world see through you as a human, not a creature.
I can't think of a better way
I
to
know,
wrap
my
up that
God.
conversation.
Oh my
That
God.
was beautiful.
Love you.
I love it.
Thank you.
Next, we'll be speaking with costume designer Helen Huang. Hi, Helen. Welcome.
Hi, Amy. I'm very excited.
Let's start with how you came to the show. What drew you to the Penguin?
I obviously love Batman, any iteration of Batman, but also ever since I was little and I saw Michael Keaton and, obviously Tim Burton's Batman. But I also really love the Batman that Matt just did. And it was just very exciting to see something so fresh and visually exciting the way he did it. And then when I read the Lauren's pilot, I thought it was one of the best things that I've read in a really long time. I was just very excited because it wasn't like a top-down kind of like Batman aerial view story. It was very much a sort of rise, bottom-up story. But also, I was very intrigued by Lauren's thematic concept of like, just like institutions and institutions failing people, and how that drives the appeal of crime in certain, people of certain economic circumstance as a way of upward mobility. And I thought that story was very interesting, especially in the character of Victor and how Oz uses that idea, how Oz succumbs to that idea in himself and then uses that idea to manipulate Victor. And then also with Sophia, I was very intrigued by, the concept of what a woman in sort of like a male-dominated crime society kind of feels like, her role, before, her role kind of after and throughout the series. So I was just kind of very excited by the themes. And then also after meeting with Lauren and what she wanted visually, I think I was just, very into the vibe that they want.
What was the vibe she was saying?
She mentioned a lot of like French Connection, obviously Scarface is like a huge thing, but also Clute. So the visual of something that looks timeless and grounded, but also very specific, and I think visually very intelligent and emotional. And those were all things I think was a part of Matt Reeves' vision also. And so to me, that's very exciting to do. And, I'm equal parts like, I like creative things, but I also really like problem solving. I think that's why I'm in the position that I am. And so I really like sort of trying to understand how that fits in the Batman universe and how we could do that with these characters.
I mean, I love that you're name-checking Scarface, because the joy of talking to you today for this episode is it's an episode that starts with a clothing choice that must have left out to a lot of gangster movie fans. Oz in the white jacket, the white pants, the maroon button-down, a.k.a. the Tony Montana, which, Helen, you went for it.
Yeah, I mean, Colin and I, when we first had a conversation about the character, he did want the character in the series to feel like almost like a strip down of Oz. And so there was a big conversation about what is the fine line between something grounded and the fine line between something that's costume and exciting for the character. And so we did try to keep him in kind of muted tones up until this sort of pivotal scene in which we felt that Oz would really peacock. And then especially since the interior is very dark, we felt like the white suit with the maroon is something that he would definitely wear. But also when I thought about Oz, in general, I thought about masculinity and how Oz views that through his lens. And I feel like he does have sort of a very traditional view of masculinity. And so there is an element of a suit and how a man could dress up a suit. So something that is peacocking, but not outside of the silhouette of what he feels is manly and maybe too decorative. And so that was where we came into that costume from.
Well, and it also, I think, makes so much thematic sense, that he and Tony Montana, they're both people that the wealthier and more powerful people around them don't take seriously because they look weak and cheap and desperate, and they have to prove that they're more powerful than they look. Well, and you're really getting inside these characters' heads. Like Oz's definition of what masculine class is definitely different than what, Johnny Viti and the Falcones would pick out.
Yeah. When we approached this, I pitched to Lauren that, if we're going to think about institutions, like Gotham is an institution, Crown Point is like the institution that they're failing. So the Falcones, even though they're a crime family, is at the top tier. And so crime families that are at the very top also feels like institutions. And so they should dress very differently than the people that are working for them, that are actually like making the money for them. And throughout the series, we try to really draw that distinction. And with the Falcones, we try to look at a lot of like Valentino in his house in the 1970s. We looked at Picasso in the 1950s and 1960s. So things that are a little bit softer than probably what Oz views as, manly. To make that distinct contrast. Also, for Oz, we tried to pick colorways that the Falcones probably wouldn't wear. And what I really wanted to do with the Falcones is like, I didn't want this thing to be like, oh, they're of crime and so they wear black and, that sort of thing. I think I try to approach Falcones as people with really good taste and, people who vacation in southern Italy and so knows what a good linen suit looks like, versus Oz, who probably also gets his suiting made, but is making choices that are like a mimic of something rather than comfort and money.
Yeah, the quiet luxury almost speaks volumes when you look at what the Falcones are wearing. I mean, let's get to Sophia, because I've really been looking forward to talking about her costumes with you all season so far. I mean, the first choice that you made that really leapt out was really the first thing I saw her in. Episode 1, right when she comes home from Arkham, that white scarf around her neck. Tell me about that choice.
Well, the white scarf was to cover up scars because Lauren, it's always been talked about that she scratches in her sleep. And so it was to cover up a vulnerability in her. But I think it really plays into the outfit, because the white outfit was something that we made, and it was like from like looking at silhouettes and suits from the 60s. Because we really wanted her silhouette to be really feminine but kind of girly. But 60s silhouettes in an essence, even in their girliness, are quite rebellious. And so that's what we went for in the beginning, because Lauren didn't want her to appear like she just came out of Arkham. She really wanted Oz to be guessing whether she's okay, what's running through her mind. And so the scarf kind of gave her sort of like a politician wife Kennedy-esque type of feel, which I feel like really helped, especially when they're in the restaurant, that sort of like interaction that they were having.
And it almost made me think of that old scary story kids told of the night of like a lady with a scarf around her neck, and when you yank on it, her whole head falls off.
Yeah, and her head falls off, yeah.
But what you're talking about with scars, I find that fascinating, because in this episode, there's a moment where she's announcing herself as a new boss, and she's wearing a black slip dress that shows all of her scars.
Yeah. We talked about that moment quite a lot, because that, aside from the chartreuse dress in episode 4, that this was the moment where it showed a lot of skin, and then also where she was wearing her mother's fur. That outfit, actually, the fur jacket was made out of faux fur, but we made it from an idea from a 1970s actual fur coat. And we wanted all the fur to seem, of different colors and different shades, just really give that texture and like wildness to it. So something very kind of like feral almost looking. And then the dress, we called it her Italian siren moment, like very Sophia Loren coming down in her scars and with the black slip and her little, you didn't get a chance to look at the shoes, but her Dolce heels. But, when we were going into it, we really did think about the fact that I still didn't want her to be dressed as a sexy woman through a male gaze, because that was never our intention with Sophia. It was very much about her being chic throughout the whole series, but of a woman that's coming into her own power and coming into possession of her own body. And I think that was the intent of that outfit, was to show that. Like, she's now in control of her image, her body, and her femininity, whereas before, the femininity was much more how the men around her wanted her to seem.
Well, and hearing you talk about the fur element of it is really fascinating, because from the very first moment to this, I've sort of sensed like an animal theme around Sophia, fur on her shoulders, tiger stripes, what looked like, I don't know, reptile skin handbags. And I was going back and forth on like what it means to me to see her in these clothes. Like, it doesn't mean, she is an animal, she is feral, or is it more like, oh, she's a Cruella de Vil willing to kill animals to look a little more glamorous?
I think the thought was more, I think it was less literal than that. I think the thought was, how we take her throughout the series. So there was a portion of the series where she's mostly in dark costumes, and how do we make dark costumes sort of stand out? And that was the choice of sort of more textured clothing. And so the faux furs and the vintage furs did play into that. But if you look at her silhouette of her coats throughout the series, they get bigger in silhouette. They get, the proportions get a little bit kookier. And I think it's just to show through her clothes that as her clothes are sculpting her body, that there's physically a metamorphosis happening. So I feel like those elements were meant to be there for an emotional impact rather than a literal impact.
I really want to hear about a small wardrobe detail that I think has extra special narrative significance. The Maroni family ring.
Yeah, so that ring was inherited from the movie because it was worn in the movie. And so we made, I don't even know how many versions of that ring we made, because everyone was a different ring size. And it was like passed on. So it was very odd in a sense where it was a small piece of item of clothing that told sort of like the biggest theme kind of narrative about power. But I also found the ring quite funny because it's kind of like a 60s-ish type of ring. And it's not everyone's cup of tea, but all these men kind of covet it. And so I kind of get a chuckle out of every time there's a scene and, one of the guys is like really interested in it, especially like in the beginning with Alberto, because when we dress Alberto, he's like a guy in silver that wears chrome hearts, he wouldn't want to wear this ring. It's not part of his aesthetic at all, but it kind of symbolizes a certain amount of power and being on top. And so I think it's quite funny that it's not stylistically really for anybody in the film besides Sal, but everyone sort of wants it,
Oh, that's fascinating. I hadn't thought of it that way. They're all adding an element to their character's wardrobe that doesn't really suit them.
Yeah. So I thought it was kind of fun.
I mean, you said that challenges is part of your job that you really love. So I'd love to hear about some of those on the show.
In this episode in particular, some of the challenges are things that the audience might not notice. So there's 2 transitional scenes with Sophia. One where the police are at her door. And then one where she is in her mom's closet before the big reveal. And both those scenes, Lauren wanted a clean palette. And so it's like, how do you do a clean palette, a palette cleanser wardrobe, basically? In the scene with the police, we did a very kind of like, you don't get to see the whole thing, but she's like wearing a black t-shirt, which is very un-Sophia in a way, and a pair of like leather pants, also un-Sophia. But that was our palette cleanser where it still felt like she made a choice, but it was kind of a pared back wardrobe before the big reveal. And then especially before she put on the coat and then the slip dress, she's actually wearing a version of something that I really love, which is from Breakfast at Tiffany. Audrey Hepburn had a white shirt that was worn backwards instead of a robe. And I always wanted to do that. And so we made our version of it. And so she was wearing that. If you look at it, it's a men's sort of like tuxedo jacket that she's wearing as the palette cleanser outfit. And so I was very proud of those. And those things are probably the things that nobody ever notices, but I pat myself in the back because it's, you know, it's exciting to me, and if it fits the brief. And a lot of times that's what, you know, as a costume designer, you need to do for the writer or the director or the showrunner.
Well, Helen, thank you so much for joining us.
No problem. It was lovely.
Before we go, I want to spend a little bit more time with series creator, executive producer, and showrunner Lauren LeFranc and Michael Kelly, seeing as his Johnny Viti meets a gruesome fate in this episode. Of everybody in this show, I am actually the least sure how I should feel about your death. How are you feeling about it?
I was bummed because I really loved it. Once I started to get into it and do these scenes with all these great actors, I was like, shit, I really wish I was in the latter episodes because I really like this show. It was a lot of fun. Yeah, it was tough, man. And that was a brutal scene to shoot, as you can imagine.
Well, when Sophia has Johnny chained up and he's telling her about Isabella, Sophia's mom, your cousin, how sincere do you think his regret is in this scene that he introduced Isabella to Carmine?
I mean, it's interesting. I wanted to make it very sincere. Look, there's definitely things at play here, right? He's trying to save himself at this moment. But I do, and I wanted to convey that he doesn't have a lot of regrets in his life, and I think not following up that night is probably one that he has a very hard time living with. I do believe he loved her, and that killed him.
Well, yeah, and the way that you say that line, when you're saying that Isabella could not escape Carmine because of her kids, there was something in your delivery, something in the emotion of your delivery, that to me almost made me think, has he been holding a grudge against Sophia all these years, fairly or not?
100%. It's not fairly because they were kids, right? So kids aren't bad, right? She grows up to be pretty bad, but kids are not bad. I don't believe that. I believe kids become bad. So it's not, I guess it's not fair to hold a grudge, but it is why she died, right? Because she couldn't leave him. And I get that. And I think he even got that. But if you look at the root of why she's dead, it's because she couldn't leave without the kids, right?
I mean, we talked episodes ago about how getting in this character, being in this mindset meant understanding that your character felt like he could just die any day. And so in these moments where he has nothing to lose, like this scene, can he be trusted? I'm so used to thinking everybody, when they're spinning stories, actually shouldn't be trusted in this show. But can he be?
No, I don't think anyone and this is just my take on that world, on that business, on the people who are in that type of life. I don't think there's trust. They turn on each other all the time, right? And she has no reason to trust or believe him, if you think about it. So no, I chose to believe him being sincere at moments in that scene. That was, but I can only go on. Like you have to make decisions as an actor, right? You have to make a decision. That I made the decision that he was being very sincere in that moment, in some of the things that he said to her, at least.
Well, in your final scene, Sophia announces that she is now the boss of the family. She's actually the boss of a new family, and that the name of power in Gotham is no longer Falcone, but Gigante. Johnny has rolled with her taking over, and he has rolled with her killing everybody in their family, but this name change really felt like a step too far for him. Why?
Well, I mean, I guess there are many reasons, right? I mean, it was again, you have to sort of make up what was, as an actor, you have to make up what was said between when you last saw him in the basement of the mausoleum and when you see him again at that table. And in my head, they had a full conversation about how this was going to go when she comes and addresses the guys in the room. And I think that's the first part where I'm like, that's not what we talked about. So, and that's not a name I want to hear. And I think it was that's when he was like, wait a second. I think there was a moment of just like,
Yeah, it's also the Maronis, right? I mean, she's saying that she wants to align the Falcones and the Maronis. And that's a big no-no to Johnny. Like, that is just not at all what should be on the table in his mind.
Nor what we talked about. Like, that's just what I mean. Like, that conversation that I think happened between the two, that was never brought up. What are we talking about here?
Well, Lauren, why did Johnny Viti have to die, and why did he have to die like this?
Yeah, Lauren.
Wow. Well, you put it that way. I love Johnny Viti. I missed him too, because he just brought so much energy. And I think about episode 3 when Oz and Sophia are aligned, and they're aligned in part because they both don't like Johnny Viti, and they see a way to try to use him to get what they need. I think for Sophia, Johnny has disrespected her, and he's sort of, in a way, the embodiment of the misogyny that she experiences when she comes into the Falcone family. But she's smart enough to know that he knows a lot about her father's business, and so she keeps him alive at the end of 104 for that reason. Like, he has information that she needs. He was Carmine's underboss, and she needs that information. And I think the fun of, what we do in 105 is, is he going to become her underboss? Like, can they actually work together and put, all their baggage behind? She's angry and she's frustrated. And she, I think, does feel like, even though what Johnny said was honest down in the basement, I think she understands when he talks about her as a child, he means it, that she could be the bigger person in that, and she could put that past her, but she doesn't want to deal with his bullshit anymore. and she doesn't have to. And I think that's sort of what she comes to at the end of 104 with what she does to the family. There's a freedom she feels. And in 105, she's feeling freer than she's ever felt. And so she's evolving as a character in that way. And Johnny is just representative of her past and represents her father in a way that she's sick of. And so I don't think she planned to necessarily kill him in the way that she did. But if Johnny says to her, you need to get the soldiers on your side down in the mausoleum, you have to enact power. I mean, I think that's something that her father taught her in brutal ways. And that's a power move for her. Those men respect her now in the crime world that they're in. And so if she can take out Johnny Viti, she can take out any of them, and they should abide by what she needs and what she wants. And then, she gives them a lot of money, and that doesn't hurt either.
That's what I was going to say, is my self-defense. I was like, well, she gave him a bunch of money, right?
Yeah.
Bought him.
Yeah, but your own advice also bit you in the ass.
Exactly. But Lauren's right. Like, he had to go. He had to go. He was never going to let her be what she wanted to be. And she knows that, right? Like, he was always going to think of her, look at her, and treat her like she's below him. And not going to work.
Guys, all right, we did it, man. Thank you again.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for having me.
So now Oz has most of the pieces he needs to start his own empire, but the approval he seeks from his mother Frances is still out of reach. Which will he get first? Gotham's respect or Francis's love? I've got a guess. Do you? Till next week. Stream new episodes of The Penguin Sundays 9 p.m. Eastern, and then join me again for a deeper look into the episode. This was an OBB Sound production and hosted by me, Amy Nicholson. Executive producers for OBB Sound are Michael D. Ratner, Scott Ratner, Arlen Konopaki, and Elias Tanner. Produced by Toby Lawless. Production manager is Brian Burgett. Engineered by Josh Falcon. Our editor and mixer is also Josh Falcon. Booking coordinator is Tess Bartholomew. Research producer is Jesse Holland. Executive producers for HBO are Becky Rowe and Savon Slater. Executives in charge of production for DC are Mike Pilata and Victor Diaz.